Now, a very important topic to discuss is what is the relationship between resilience and affective traits. So, affective traits are basically depression, anxiety, and stress. So the relationship is one that reflects how individuals' emotional response are influenced by the capacity to adapt to adversity, which is resilience. Right. So resilience is an individual's ability to recover from or adapt positively to stress, adversity, or challenges. It involves the capacity to bounce back from difficult situations and maintain well-being in the face of adversity. People with higher resilience are generally better at managing emotional challenges, adapting to stress, and maintaining mental well-being during hardship. Now, affective traits like depression, anxiety, stress are emotional responses that can be more intense or persistent in individuals who lack resilience. So depression (D), anxiety (A), and stress (S) can indicate emotional or physiological vulnerabilities, which, if not managed, may lead to long-term mental health issues. Now, key findings from the research are that they show a negative correlation. So resilience is often negatively correlated with affective traits. This means that individuals with higher resilience tend to have lower levels of depression, anxiety, and stress because they are negatively correlated. So more the resilience, the lesser the depression, anxiety, and stress. And higher the levels of depression, anxiety, stress, lower is the resilience. Right. So resilience scores are basically measured by CDAs, and DAS scores basically are for depression, anxiety, and stress scales. That's the full form. Now, buffering effect. Resilience can buffer or mitigate the effects of negative emotional states. In other words, people who are more resilient may be able to better manage negative emotions and recover quicker from adversity, preventing the emotional spiral that leads to high levels of depression or anxiety. Adaptive coping. Resilient individuals tend to use more adaptive coping strategies like problem solving, seeking social support, reappraisal, which helps them reduce their emotional distress and handle stress more effectively. People with low resilience may rely more on avoidant or maladaptive coping strategies by cutting themselves off, which can increase emotional reactivity and make it harder for them to manage their stress and anxiety levels. And now we move on to factors of influencing habituation. So firstly, startle potential of the stimulus, which is salience or intensity. Less arousing stimuli, basically lower intensity or less salient, result in faster habituation. While high intensity stimuli or more salient stimuli, that is louder sounds, they take longer to habituate to as they grab attention and cause a stronger initial response. And it takes more time to basically get habituated or get in the habit of listening to that louder sound for that example. So high intensity or more salient stimuli have basically slower habituation, and faster habituation is for less arousing stimuli. Then response decrements. Large response decrements, greater decrease in response, are observed earlier in the exposure. This suggests that with the first few exposure, the organism quickly adapts, but over time the rate of response reduction slows. Then interval between repeated exposure, masked versus spaced stimuli. So shorter inter-exposure intervals, which is masked exposures, that is repeated exposures in rapid succession with the temporal gap being very less. Since the time spacing is very less, it leads to faster habituation. But this basically habituation tends to last for a short period. While spaced exposure, which are longer intervals between exposures, result in slower habituation, but these results last longer and is more resistant to spontaneous recovery. In spontaneous recovery, after a period of no stimulation, the habituated response can re-strengthen or reappear, basically showing that habituation is not always permanent and can be reversed with time. Then habituation is stimulus specific, meaning that an individual will habituate to specific stimulus but will not necessarily habituate to similar stimuli unless they are very similar. Generalization. Now, basically, stimulus generalization is when an individual shows habituated response to a stimulus that is similar to the original stimulus. For example, if you become habituated to a specific tone, you may also show a reduced response to a similar tone. The phonological significance, like a similar sounding tone. Then we have dishabituation, which refers to a renewed response to an early stimulus after the introduction of a novel stimulus. For example, if you're habituated to a sound but then hear a new sound, your response to the original sound might increase again after the novel stimulus as the new stimulus reawakened the habituation process. And that's it.